Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Brajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Brajana Ranjana. Jamunatira Vanachari. Yamunatira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Mr. Paramahansa, Madhavajakacharya, Ashtotar, the Sri Srimad, His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parudikacharya Ashtotar the Sri Srimad, His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavindra Ki Jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur's Glorious Appearance Day Ki Jai, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga. So first, I'd like to just announce that this wonderful biography written by Bhaktivedanta Swami, which took years and years to compile, Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava, is free. You can download for free. If you want to know how, or I can send it to you, just write to me at dravida108@gmail.com. It's quite amazing. Huge 3 volumes, very exhaustive. And he's offering that free to any devotee. So on this glorious day, I'm going to read a little bit from the Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava, Glories of Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati, and as well from the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, because there's some wonderful passage in there about how Prabhupada first met Bhaktisiddhanta, and also Bhaktisiddhanta's relationship, appearing to Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So it'll be the from this section here. I'll begin with the meeting of Srila Prabhupada with Bhaktisiddhanta in 1922. Okay, so this is, let's see, chapter volume 1, Lifetime in Preparation, India, 1896 to 1965, in the Lilamrita. So this is the introduction to the chapter entitled "A Very Nice Saintly Person," and that describes how Prabhupada first described Bhaktisiddhanta after he just met him. And here's a quote from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati: "There has not been, there will not be such benefactors of the highest merit as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his devotees have been. The offer of other benefits is only a deception. It is rather a great harm, whereas the benefit done by him and his followers is the truest and greatest eternal benefit. This benefit is not for one particular country, causing mischief to another. but it benefits the whole universe. So this tells Prabhupada's with his friend here, Narendranath Malak. Abhai's friend Narendranath Malak was insistent. He wanted Abhai to see a sadhu from Mayapur. Narain and some of his friends had already met the sadhu at his nearby ashram on Ultadanga Junction Road, and now they wanted Abhai's opinion. Everyone within their circle of friends considered Abhai the leader. So if Narain could tell the others that Abhai also had a high regard for the sadhu, then that would confirm their own estimations. Abhai was reluctant to go, but Narain pressed him. They stood talking amidst the passers-by on the crowded early evening street, as the traffic of horse-drawn hackneys, ox carts, and occasional auto taxis and motor buses moved noisily on the road. This is, of course, Calcutta. Narain put his hand firmly around his friend's arm, trying to drag him forward, while Abhai smiled but stubbornly pulled the other way. Narain argued that since they were only a few blocks away, they should at least pay a short visit. Abhai laughed and asked to be excused. People could see that the two young men were friends, but it was a curious sight. The handsome young man dressed in white khadi kurta, that's Prabhupada, and dhoti, being pulled along by his friend. Narain explained that the sadhu, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati, was a Vaishnava and a great devotee of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. One of his disciples, a sannyasi, had visited the Malak house and had invited them to meet Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. A few of the Malaks had gone to see him and had been very much impressed. But Abhai remained skeptical. "Oh no, I know all these sadhus," he said. "I'm not going." Abhai had seen many sadhus in his childhood. Every day his father had entertained at least 3 or 4 in his home. Some of them were no more than beggars, and some even smoked ganja, marijuana. Gaur Mohan Dey, that's his father, had been very liberal in allowing anyone who wore the saffron robes of a sannyasi to come. But did it mean that though a man was no more than a beggar or ganja smoker, he had to be considered saintly just because he dressed as a sannyasi, or was collecting funds in the name of building a monastery, or could influence people with his speech? No. By and large, they were a disappointing lot. Abhai had even seen a man in his neighborhood who was a beggar by occupation. In the morning, when others dressed in their work clothes and went to their jobs, this man would put on saffron cloth and go out to beg, and in this way earn his livelihood. But was it fitting that such a so-called sadhu be paid a respectful visit, as if he were a guru? Narain argued that he felt that this particular sadhu was a very learned scholar, and that Abhai should at least meet him and judge for himself. Abhai wished that Narain would not behave this way, but finally he could no longer refuse his friend. Thank God. I don't know where we'd be if he didn't. Together they walked past the Parsnath Jain temple to Ultadanga with its sign Bhaktivinoda Asan, announcing it to be the quarters of the Gaudiya Math. When they inquired at the door, a young man recognized Mr. Malak, Narain. Narain had previously given a donation, and immediately escorted them up to the roof of the 2nd floor and into the presence of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati, who was sitting and enjoying the early evening atmosphere with a few disciples and guests. Sitting with his back very straight, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati appeared tall. He was slender, his arms were long, and his complexion was fair and golden. He wore round bifocals with simple frames. His nose was sharp, his forehead broad, and his expression was very scholarly, yet not at all timid. The vertical markings of Vaishnav tilak on his forehead were familiar to Abhai, as were the simple sannyas robes that draped over his right shoulder, leaving the other shoulder and half his chest bare. He wore tulsi neck beads, and the clay Vaishnav markings of tilak were visible at his throat, shoulder, and upper arms. A clean white Brahminical thread was looped around his neck and draped across his chest. Abhai and Narain, having both been raised in Vaishnav families, immediately offered prostrated obeisances at the sight of the revered sannyasi. While the two men were still rising and preparing to sit, before any preliminary formalities of conversation had begun, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta immediately said to them, "You are educated young men. Why don't you preach Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message throughout the whole world?" Abhai could hardly believe what he had just heard. They had not even exchanged views, yet this sadhu was telling them what they should do. Sitting face to face with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Abhai was gathering his wits and trying to gain a comprehensible impression. But this person had already told them to become preachers and go all over the world. Abai was immediately impressed, but he wasn't going to drop his intelligent skepticism. After all, there were assumptions in what the sadhu had said. Abai had already announced himself by his dress to be a follower of Gandhi. Now that, because they would wear this khadi, which is homemade cloth, and it's a little more rough, and so you could immediately tell. Abai had already announced himself by his dress to be a follower of Gandhi, and he felt the impulse to raise an argument. Yet as he continued to listen to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta speak, he also began to feel won over by the sadhu's strength of conviction. Abai could sense that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta didn't care for anything but Lord Chaitanya, and that this was what made him great. This was why followers had gathered around him, and why Abai himself felt drawn, inspired, and humbled, and wanted to hear more. But he felt obliged to make an argument, to test the truth. Drawn irresistibly into discussion, Abai spoke up and answered to the words Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had so tersely spoken in the first seconds of their meeting. "Who will hear your Chaitanya's message?" Abai queried. "We are a dependent country. First, India must become independent. How can we spread Indian culture if we are under British rule?" Abai had not asked haughtily, just to be provocative, yet his question was clearly a challenge. If he were to take this sadhu's remark to them as a serious one, and there was nothing in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's demeanor to indicate that he had not been serious, Abai felt compelled to question how he could propose such a thing while India was still dependent. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta replied in a quiet, deep voice that Krishna consciousness didn't have to wait for a change in Indian politics, nor was it dependent on who ruled. Krishna consciousness was so important, so exclusively important, that it could not wait, in italics. Abai was struck by his boldness. How could he say such a thing? The whole world of India beyond this little Uttadanga rooftop was in turmoil and seemed to support what Abai had said. Many famous leaders of Bengal, many saints, even Gandhi himself, men who were educated and spiritually minded, all might very well have asked this same question, challenging this sadhu's relevancy. And yet he was dismissing everything and everyone as if they were of no consequence. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta continued, "Whether one power or another ruled was a temporary situation, but the eternal reality is Krishna consciousness, and the real self is the spirit soul. No man-made political system, therefore, could actually help humanity. This was the verdict of the Vedic scriptures and the line of spiritual masters. Although everyone is an eternal servant of God, when one takes himself to be the temporary body and regards the nation of his birth as worshipable, he comes under illusion. The leaders and followers of the world's political movements, including the movement for Swaraj, independence, were simply cultivating this illusion. Real welfare work, whether individual, social, or political, should help prepare a person for his next life and help him reestablish his eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead." Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had articulated these ideas many times before in his writings, and this is the little quote from his writings. "There has not been, there will not be such benefactors of the highest merit as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his devotees have been. The offer of other benefits is only a deception. It is rather a great harm, whereas the benefit done by him and his followers is the truest and greatest eternal benefit. This benefit is not for one particular country causing mischief to another, but it benefits the whole universe. The kindness that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has shown to jivas absolves them eternally from all wants, from all inconveniences, and from all distresses. That kindness does not produce any evil, and the jivas who have it will not be the victims of the evils of the world." As Abai listened attentively to the arguments of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he recalled a Bengali poet who had written that even less advanced civilizations like China and Japan were independent, and yet India labored under political oppression. Abai knew well the philosophy of nationalism, which stressed that Indian independence had to come first. An oppressed people was a reality. The British slaughter of innocent citizens was a reality, and independence would benefit people. Spiritual life was a luxury that could be afforded only after independence. In the present times, the cause of national liberation from the British was the only relevant spiritual movement. The people's cause was in itself God. That was the argument, outside. Yet because Abai had been raised a Vaishnava, he appreciated what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was saying. Abai had already concluded that this was certainly not just another questionable sadhu, and he perceived the truth in what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said. This sadhu wasn't concocting his own philosophy, and he wasn't simply proud or belligerent, even though he spoke in a way that kicked out practically every other philosophy. He was speaking the eternal teachings of the Vedic literature and the sages, and Abai loved to hear it. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, speaking sometimes in English, sometimes in Bengali, and sometimes quoting the Sanskrit verses of Bhagavad Gita, spoke of Sri Krishna as the highest Vedic authority. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna had declared that a person should give up whatever duty he considered religious and surrender unto him, the personality of Godhead. Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja. And the Srimad Bhagavatam confirmed the same thing. Dharma projitakaitavota padamode matsaranam satam vejam. All other forms of religion are impure and should be thrown out, and only Bhagavat Dharma, performing one's duties to please the Supreme Lord, should remain. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's presentation was so cogent that anyone who accepted the Shastras would have to accept this conclusion. The people were now faithless, said Bhaktisiddhanta, and therefore they no longer believed that devotional service could remove all anomalies, even on the political scene. He went on to criticize anyone who was ignorant of the soul and yet claimed to be a leader. He even cited names of contemporary leaders and pointed out their failures, and he emphasized the urgent need to render the highest good to humanity by educating people about the eternal soul and the soul's relation to Krishna and devotional service. Abai had never forgotten the worship of Lord Krishna or his teachings in Bhagavad Gita. And Abai's family had always worshipped Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, whose mission Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was espousing. As these Gaudiya Math people worshipped Krishna, he also had worshipped Krishna throughout his life and had never forgotten Krishna. But now he was astounded to hear the Vaishnava philosophy presented so masterfully. Despite his involvement in college, marriage, the national movement, and other affairs, he had never forgotten Krishna. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was now stirring up within him his original Krishna consciousness, and by the words of this spiritual master, not only was he remembering Krishna, but he felt his Krishna consciousness being enhanced 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. What had been unspoken in Abai's boyhood, what had been vague in Jagannath Puri, what he had been distracted from at college, what he had been protected in by his father, now surged forth within Abai in responsive feelings, and he wanted to keep it. He felt himself defeated, but he liked it. He suddenly realized that he had never before been defeated in argument, but this defeat was not a loss. It was an immense gain. And Srila Prabhupada recalls, this is a quote from Prabhupada later, I was from a Vaishnava family, so I could appreciate what he was preaching. Of course, he was speaking to everyone, but he found something in me, and I was convinced about his argument and mode of presentation. I was so much struck with wonder, I could understand, here is the proper person who can give a real religious idea. It was late. Abai and Narain had been talking with him for more than 2 hours. One of the brahmacharis gave them each a bit of prasadam in their open palms, and they rose gratefully and took their leave. They walked down the stairs onto the street. The night was dark. Here and there a light was burning, and there were some open shops. Abai pondered in great satisfaction what he had just heard, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's explanation of the independence movement as a temporary incomplete cause had made a deep impression on him. He felt himself less a nationalist and more a follower of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He also thought it would have been better if he were not married. This great personality was asking him to preach. He could have immediately joined, but he was married, and to leave his family would be an injustice. Walking away from the ashram, Narain turned to his friend. So, Abai, what was your impression? What do you think of him? He's wonderful, replied Abai. The message of Lord Chaitanya is in the hands of a very expert person. And Srila Prabhupada remembers this later. I accepted him as my spiritual master immediately, not officially, but in my heart. I was thinking that I had met a very nice, saintly person. This is like why we're all sitting here. So wonderful. All right, I have some other selections that I picked out here, so let me give me a second here. All right, I think next we're going to read about, let's see, just give me a second. Okay. Okay, so this is the famous meeting of Prabhupada with Bhaktisiddhanta in Radhakund, where Bhaktisiddhanta told him, if you ever get money, print books. This is also a seminal meeting for all of us. So in November of 1935, so this is Prabhupada has been initiated and he's been helping, you know, even though he's still with his business, he's been helping the Gaudiya Math. In November of 1935, Srila Prabhupada was again with his spiritual master in Vrindavan. It was the Kartik season, the ideal time to visit Vrindavan, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was staying for a month with his disciples at peaceful Radhakund, the sacred lake where Radha and Krishna used to sport. After leaving Bombay in July, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati had gone to Calcutta, where he had spoken on the radio, delivered many public lectures, welcomed back the preachers he had sent to Europe, and finished publishing his Srimad Bhagavatam translation and commentary. Then in October, he had come to Radhakund. Occupying the small one-story house Bhaktivinoda Thakur had constructed, he had been reading and speaking to the assembled devotees on the Upanishads, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and Srimad Bhagavatam. He had also installed deities at Sri Kunjarihari Math. The banks of Radhakund were overhung with bright green foliage growing from the gnarled branches of ancient tamarind, tamal, and neem trees. In the shallows of the water, cranes stood on stilt-like legs, while river terns, T-E-R-N-S, a type of bird, while river terns skimmed across the lake, sometimes abruptly diving for fish. Sometimes a tortoise would poke its nose up from the water's depth, or a fish would jump. Green parrots, usually in pairs, flew in and out of the green trees, and sparrows chirped and hopped from place to place. Peacocks were also there, mostly in nearby gardens, as were occasional rabbits and even deer. The atmosphere was enriched with the history of Krishna Lila. 5,000 years ago, Radha and Krishna had engaged in transcendental pastimes here, and only 500 years ago, Lord Chaitanya had rediscovered Radhakund. Lord Chaitanya's great follower, Raghunath Das Goswami, had resided here for many years, constantly chanting Hare Krishna and discussing the activities of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And here in a small bhajan kutir, Krishnadas Kaviraj had written Chaitanya Charitamrita, the narrative of the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya that Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati relished so much. Many of the inhabitants at Radhakund were Babajis, living in small bhajan kutirs and spending their time chanting Hare Krishna. Having heard of his spiritual master's stay here, Abhay, bringing his son with him, had traveled from Bombay just to have darshan of his spiritual master. To see Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was always an occasion for jubilation, but to see him in Vrindavan was an added perfection. This meeting with his beloved guide and friend was different from the time in 1932, when Abhay had seen him on the Vrindavan Parakram. Now Abhay was no longer sitting anonymously in the back of the room. Now he was a bona fide disciple, recognized as the, quote, Kavi, who had written the praiseworthy poem and essay, you know, absolute ascension thou hast proved, and personal calamity thou hast removed. Bhaktisiddhanta loved that one. Recognized as the Kavi, who had written the praiseworthy poem and essay, the young man who listened well, the devotee who had helped the Allahabad Math, and who had established the Math in Bombay. Already on this visit, Abhay had had occasion to be alone with his spiritual master, who had remembered Abhay's son and presented him with a small bandi, a jacket. And now, as they walked together alone on the bank of Radhakund, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta turned and spoke confidentially to Abhay. There had been some quarreling amongst his leading disciples in Calcutta, he said, and this distressed him very much. Even now, in Vrindavan, it weighed heavily on his mind. Some of his disciples had been fighting over who would use various rooms and facilities at the Gaudiya Math headquarters in Calcutta. These devotees were all members of the same Math, and the building was for propagating Krishna consciousness under the leadership of Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati. Yet even in their spiritual master's presence, they were quarreling. Brahmins and Vaishnavas were supposed to be free from envy of any creature. What to speak of envy of one another? If they were to fight now, what would they do after their spiritual master passed away? Abhay had no part in these matters and did not even know the details or who was involved. But as he listened to his spiritual master, he also became distressed. Deeply concerned, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said to Abhay, Agunj Valbe, meaning there will be fire in the mat. One day there would be fire in the Calcutta Gaudiya mat, and that fire of party interests would spread and destroy. Abai heard but did not know what to make of it. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had fought so long and boldly to establish that anyone of any birth could be elevated, to become a Brahmin, a sannyasi, or a Vaishnava. But if his followers became contaminated by a little wealth and the desire for prestige, thereby showing themselves to be still low-class men despite their training and purification, then his mission would be disrupted. If, in the name of religion, they became attached to ease, position, and prestige, it could only mean that they had failed to grasp the teachings of their spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada, recalling this later to his American disciples, he was lamenting that these men are simply after the stones and bricks of the building. He condemned, he was very, very sorry. And Bhaktisiddhanta now says in Radhakund, when we were living in a rented house, if we could collect 200 or 300 rupees, we were living very nicely at Ottadanga. We were happier then. But since we have been given this marble palace at Bagh Bazaar, there is friction between our men. Who will occupy this room? Who will occupy that room? Who will be the proprietor of this room? Everyone is planning in different ways. It would be better to take the marble from the walls and secure money. If I could do this and print books, that would be better. Abai felt the spiritual master speaking to him in urgency, as if asking him for help or warning him to avert a disaster. But what could he do? Srila Bhaktisiddhanta then said directly to Abai, and he gives the Bengali here, Amar itcha chila kichu bai karana. I had the desire to print some books. If you ever get money, print books. Standing by Radhakund and beholding his spiritual master, Abai felt the words deeply enter his own life. If you ever get money, print books. Okay. So now this is right at the end of his manifestation. And Bhaktisiddhanta, that's how the Prabhupada records, and there was a little exchange of letters, and it's important at this time. December 1936, he passed away like the 1st of January, right, 1937, something like that. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was in poor health in Jagannath Puri. Abai was in Bombay, and he wanted to write his Guru Maharaj a letter. Quote, he is a little kind upon me, Abai thought. He will understand my request, and he began to write. Dear Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances at your lotus feet. You have got many disciples, and I am one of them, but they are doing direct service to you. Some of them are brahmacharis, some of them are sannyasis, but I am a householder. I cannot. Sometimes I give monetary help, while I cannot give you direct service. Is there any particular service that I can do? 2 weeks later, Abai received the reply. I am fully confident that you can explain in English our thoughts and arguments to the people who are not conversant with the languages of the other members. This will do much good to yourself as well as your audience. I have every hope that you can turn yourself into a very good English preacher if you serve the mission to inculcate the novel impression of Lord Chaitanya's teachings in the people in general, as well as philosophers and religionists. Abai at once recognized this to be the same instruction he had received at their first meeting in 1922. He took it as a confirmation, even though he didn't mention going abroad here. He tied that together. If he's preaching in English, then naturally he'll go abroad, which he eventually did, obviously. He took it as a confirmation. There was now no doubt as to the purpose of his life. What his spiritual master had said in Calcutta in 1922 had not been a chance remark, nor had that been a chance meeting. The instruction was the same. Turn yourself into a very good English preacher. This will do much good to yourself as well as your audience. Yeah, it describes the next paragraph. He passed away on January 1st, 1937. Okay. So I'm going to read one more passage, and this is the section describing his initiation by Gaur-Kishore Das Babaji, and this is from the Bhaktisiddhanta by Baba, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati by Baba. So just give me this type is very small, so I'm going to have to increase the size. No. Okay, here we go. Okay. Late in 1898, after performing bhajan for almost 30 years in Brajamandala, Srila Gaura Das Babaji Maharaj arrived in Navadvip Dham, eager for darshan of the deities of Shri Shri Gaur Vishnupriya at the newly revealed birth site of Lord Chaitanya. So that they'd been installed by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Right? Babaji Maharaj was a bhajananandi, preferring to live in a holy place to concentrate on chanting rather than going out into the world to establish temples and recruit followers. As Sakshat Vairagyamurti, renunciation personified, he rejected bodily comforts and made little effort to shelter or maintain his body. He ate, sometimes, raw earth, uncooked rice, and other items generally considered inedible. He shunned company, had no patience with pretenders posing as devotees, and ignored or vituperated against those who approached him, the pretenders who approached him. He cared not for any residence. In Navadvip, he lived for some time under a chai, a detachable wicker awning of a country boat, and for several months in a latrine. His possessions, now why did he do that? Because there were so many people coming trying to get his blessings, material. They weren't serious about devotion, so to avoid them, he just lived in a retreat. His possessions were practically nil. Sometimes he donned cloth taken from dead bodies at the burning ghat, and at other times went naked. He had no interest apart from chanting the holy names continuously and associating with the few devotees he recognized as genuine, which included Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Toward the end of 1898, at Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's newly constructed house in Swananda Sukhada Kunj, which if you visit Mayapur, you'll see if you go on Parakram, or even just cross the Jalangi. Swananda Sukhada Kunj, Sri Siddhanta Saraswati had his first darshan of Babaji Maharaj, who arrived there wearing a tiger skin cap and carrying a basket containing puja paraphernalia, both of which had been given to him by the famed Sri Bhagavan Das Babaji of Kalna. Sri Siddhanta Saraswati became deeply struck upon hearing Babaji Maharaj recite a song articulating Sri Raghunath Das Goswami's feelings for Srimati Radharani. Bhaktisiddhanta wrote down those esoteric verses and ensouled them as the essence of his own internal bhajan. I don't even know that word. Ensoul? E-N-S-O-U-L. Embedded in the heart, in the soul. I guess it's obvious, yeah. Some time later, Babaji Maharaj presented Sri Siddhanta Saraswati with that hat and basket of paraphernalia, as well as 4 or 5 pieces of knotted string for counting japa, and a tilak stamp with the initials Ha, Kri, meaning Hare Krishna. Although practically worthless materially, these gifts were spiritually invaluable, having been given by a Paramahamsa. Although many reputed gurus were desirous to count Sri Siddhanta Saraswati as their own, because he was known as a great scholar and a very serious devotee, although they wanted to initiate him, he detected their insincerity, spurned their wooing, and stood opposed to them. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had been his Shiksha Guru from birth, and had given him Harinam and mantras for worshipping Sri Nrsingadev and Sri Kurmadev. Yet, so that Sri Siddhanta Saraswati could attain additional spiritual shelter, guidance, and inspiration for his future colossal service, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur sent him to Srila Gaura Das Babaji for further initiation. Sri Siddhanta Saraswati was decidedly aristocratic, intellectual, and of exemplary virtuous deportment, whereas by external consideration, Babaji Maharaj was illiterate, cranky, and crude. There's a note on this. I think he's... Anyway, it's hard to reach. Indeed, he was reputed to vehemently refuse persons who approached him for diksha, even sometimes beating them with an umbrella. Predictably, he also declined to induct his would-be disciple, caring not a whit for his apparent good qualities, which shook Sri Siddhanta Saraswati, accustomed as he was to being respected. Babaji Maharaj told him, "I once accepted a disciple, but he cheated me and went away. I will not make any further disciples." But Sri Siddhanta Saraswati was not easily discouraged and again begged for mercy. Babaji Maharaj responded, "I'll ask Mahaprabhu. If he gives permission, your request will be granted." When after a few days, Sri Siddhanta Saraswati returned and inquired, what was Mahaprabhu's order? Babaji Maharaj replied, "Oh, I forgot to ask. And when Sri Siddhanta Saraswati came for the third time, he was directly refused. I asked, Babaji Maharaj said, but I did not receive the command of Mahaprabhu. Sri Siddhanta Saraswati was devastated. He stood up and uttered, Karuna na hoile kandiya, kandiya, prana na rakibo ara. Without your mercy, weeping and weeping, I will no longer sustain my life. Sri Siddhanta Saraswati resolved that however many times he might be refused, no further would he rotate in the world without gaining Babaji Maharaj's grace. Seeing his young aspirant's genuine desire and commitment, Babaji Maharaj relented. He told Sri Siddhanta Saraswati to bathe in the nearby Saraswati, tributary of the Ganga. Is that the Bhagirati? Yeah. And then return, after which he accepted him as a disciple. This was January 1900. Sri Siddhanta Saraswati later reflected on this incident. When out of false ego I was thinking, I am a great scholar of mathematics and philosophy, let any big pundit come at any time, day or night, and I will cut his propositions to pieces. At that time I got the darshan of the lotus feet of Sri Gurudev. He ignored everything that was previously appreciated in me, my truthfulness, my moral and pious life, and my intellectualism, knowing them to be of little value. When I saw that he ignored whatever was good in me, I realized how good he himself must be, who could neglect so many good qualities in me. What inconceivable wealth he possessed. Being neglected by him, I understood that there was no one more fallen and contemptible than myself. That was my actual identity. The very things that I adjudged desiderata, such as, it means good things, such as scholarship and upright character, this exalted soul regarded as valueless. I apprehended that within himself, this noble personality possessed priceless treasure. I then pondered that either he is extremely puffed up or is exceedingly merciful. I then haughtily said to my Gurudev, you are a worshipper of that cheater and debauched Krishna, so why would you be compassionate to someone like me, dedicated to ordinary morality? Humbly and sincerely I prayed to the Supreme Lord for his mercy. Later, by his grace, I recognized that without receiving the blessings of this peerless saint, and without serving him, nothing good could happen to me. When I accepted that and acted accordingly, and then received the causeless unlimited grace of my Sri Gurudev and refuge at his lotus feet, I deemed my life fulfilled. I had considered my Gurudev to be unequaled in vairagya, but somewhat short of learning. But he reduced to powder my audacity born of book learning. With the mallet of his mercy, he revealed that whatever I had adjudged to be the highest ideal was in fact most low and despicable. When by his grace that instruction first entered my ears, my diminutive brain lacked the capacity to accommodate such transcendental knowledge. But to all fools like me, he gave the chance to hear such lofty topics. I have understood that if the people of this world do not receive the same jolt that I received from my Gurudev, then their consciousness will not awaken. Therefore, I am telling everyone, I am more foolish than anyone else on earth. Please, all of you, do not be foolish like me. Do not live your life within the limitation of calculating consciousness. Discuss Vaikuntha Katha, and you will become a great person. I am telling you what I have realized to be supremely beneficial. And then this final little addendum by the author. Although Babaji Maharaj was always strictly forbid anyone to touch his feet, once he voluntarily placed them on Sri Siddhanta Saraswati's head and ordered him, preach the absolute truth, keeping aside all other activities, thus confirming his disciples' life mission. So that's what I picked out. No, it's not that late. Should I read a little more?
I think so.
Okay.
We're fasting.
Yeah, that's true. All right, let me see if I can find the table of contents here. This is quite a wonderful book. All right. Well, here's a chapter called Christianity. Let's see what that says. How we dealt with that. Okay. All right. Now, ironically, Although Western Christians overseas tended to brusquely present their creed with a triumphalism that in their minds precluded dialogue or consideration of other beliefs, at home their religion had already effectively lost the ideological battle with empiricism, having been forced into détente with the scientific outlook. And although Christian missionaries were at least as eager to conquer the world as were their more politically and economically motivated colonialist compatriots, the international ethos had effectively shifted toward a humanistic and relativistic perspective under the influence of Western trends in the slipstream of modern education. Nevertheless, Christianity undeniably remained a major influence in the world. 4/5 of the Earth's land surface was ruled by at least nominal Christians, and a doctrine whose challenge Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati was obliged to face. He did so by highlighting both its strengths and weaknesses, echoing Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who in his early life was much exposed to Christianity and appreciated its personalist theistic basis. Srila Sarasvati Thakura considered Christianity a partial step toward Vaishnava Dharma, and described Lord Chaitanya's teachings as extended Christianity. In other words, Christ's message in its pristine and fully blossomed form is included in Lord Chaitanya's philosophy, for Mahaprabhu's gifts are of an altogether higher dimension than the acceptance of God's existence, the promises of reward and threats of punishment, and the moral injunctions that form the basis of Christianity. And whereas Christianity expounds the fatherhood of Godhead, Gaudiya Vaishnava Dharma goes further to the transcendental sonhood and consorthood of Godhead. Srila Sarasvati Thakura described that to consider the Lord our parent entails the rotten concept that he is our servitor and we the enjoyers. Close quote. As he told the challenging Professor Suthers, we claim to be greater and better Christians than Westerners, while lauding Jesus as a Shaktivesh avatar, who did not teach the eat, drink, and be merry business. Srila Sarasvati Thakura clearly delineated the superior position of Gaur Bhaktas over that of Lord Jesus. Here's a quote from Bhaktisiddhanta. I think something he wrote. In the Western countries, Christians believe that the magnanimous Lord Jesus Christ is the only Guru, who appeared in this world to accept the burden of all sins of the jivas. But associates of Sri Gaur, the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, like Sri Vasudev Dutt Thakur and Sri Haridas Thakur, are unlimitedly millions of times more advanced and liberal than Jesus Christ, because they taught Vaishnava Prema Bhava to benefit all people in the universe. In Sri Vasudev Dutt Thakur, selflessness by relinquishing mundane self-interest and others and one's own spiritual welfare in the form of serving Vishnu are superbly harmonized, recognizing Sri Gaur Sundar as the ultimate reality devoid of all illusion and the original personality of Godhead. Vasudev Dutt bore on his shoulders the burden of the material disease of all jivas, their indifference to Krishna, and not only their sins, but superlatively more formidable, their multitudinous terrible offenses. Thus he sincerely prayed with mind, body, and words to free the jivas from the malady of material existence. This example of compassion is far beyond the imagination of the greatest karmis and gyanis, not only in this world, but in all the 14 worlds. Now this is nicely told in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, that Vasudeva Dutt approached Lord Chaitanya and said, I know, he knew that he was Krishna, they had understood that. That just let all of the living entities' sins come on me, and I'll suffer in this material world perpetually, and you can take them all back to Godhead. And Lord Chaitanya, actually, he cried, and he embraced him. He said, that's not necessary. Just by your desire, they're going to be delivered, because they'll all be chanting Hare Krishna, eventually. So it's a very touching passage, and Vasudev Dutt really meant it, because you can imagine to take on all of those sins, thousands of years you'd be suffering. But he was prepared to do it for the benefit of the people, and that's really the heart of the pure Vaishnava. Let me suffer in order that these people can be delivered. Okay. Eloquent speakers' tongues reach perfection by glorifying the qualities of such devotees of Lord Chaitanya. And the pens of poets and historians who have forsaken mundane research attain their highest success in describing the qualities of these Mahabhagavats imbued with selfless devotion to the Lord. Such is the greatness among greats and gloriousness among glorious of the servants of the abundantly magnanimous Sri Krishna Chaitanya. And this has all been a quote from Bhaktisiddhanta's writing now. Bhakti Vikas Swami continues, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati detected the flaw in philosophically attempting either to humanize God or deify man, which, albeit present in perverted Hinduism, is a conceptually quite different manner. In a conceptually quite different manner, was the very foundation of Christianity. When some Christian priests proposed to him that Madhurya Ras is also an aspect of Christianity, as evidenced by those medieval mystics who sought unity with Christ as their bridegroom, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati rejected that claim, for such esoteric endeavors were focused on the Son of Godhead rather than directly on the Supreme Lord himself. Srila Sarasvati Thakura shed the light of Gaudiya Siddhanta on certain biblical teachings. He equated Jesus' famous submission, Thy will be done, spoken from the position of a devotee, to the similarly well-known conclusion of Bhagavad Gita, Sarva Dharma Parityajya Mamekam Charanam Vraja. Abandon all varieties of Dharma, just surrender to me. Uttered from the standpoint of Godhead. He cited biblical instructions to chant the names of God as being in accord with the Sankirtan movement, and stated that if offered in unmixed devotion, church prayers are also kirtan. He deemed the supplication, "Give us our daily bread," as being far from true devotion, for God should not be regarded as a servitor to be called upon to provide corporal demands. Prabhupada's famous order supplier. We shouldn't think of him as an order supplier. Rather, one should request food for the soul. He would often quote the commandment, "Do not take the name of the Lord in vain," close quote, and comment that it had been misinterpreted by pseudo-teachers. God should not be called upon for supplying temporal needs, and thus to not take his name in vain means to chant without anyabhilasha, motive other than pure devotion. To chant without anyabhilasha, which is the absence of any motive other than pure devotion. Pure devotees do not chant the Lord's names to counteract sinful reactions, accumulate piety, or attain supernal pleasures, heavenly pleasures, nor to mitigate famine, pestilence, social unrest, civil insurrection, or disease, nor to obtain wealth, an earthly kingdom, or any other object of personal enjoyment. Since the name of Bhagavan is directly the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to ask him to fulfill our wishes is to consider him the supremely worshipable, our servant. This is an offense. Therefore, calling the Lord's names for any reason other than to attain his devotional service is useless. Jesus Christ told us not to take the Lord's name in vain or uselessly. Yet this doesn't mean that we do not need to chant the Lord's names constantly while sleeping. This is all a quote from Bhaktisiddhanta. While sleeping, while dreaming, while eating, or when walking about. To chant the Lord's name, begging for his service, is not a useless activity. It is our only duty. But to make a show of chanting for some other purpose, for actualizing our own desires, is useless. We should not take up chanting the Lord's names in vain. We should not chant to attain dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Instead, we should always chant to attain service to Bhagavan. Do not chant the name for elevation or salvation, whereby you will entangle yourself instead of attaining service to the Absolute. In Christians' emphasis on mundane charitable works, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati perceived ignorance of the rudimentary spiritual principle of difference between body and soul. And he detected aversion to Godhead in the concept of a Beelzebub, or a rival of God. That's the devil. Bhaktisiddhanta declared that hearing and chanting of Harikatha is the actual method of purgation of sins, and that the Western system of confession is hypocritical. He stated that through the misconceptions that there can be only one guru in the total course of history, and that the soul has only one birth, Semites had introduced many obstacles to legitimate spiritual understanding, and that such misunderstandings must be dispelled. He also warned that if the Semitic psychology represented by the notion of an undefinable supreme being was tantamount to asserting that God is formless, then it struck at the very root of all genuine spiritual activity. Semitic means Christianity. I think it also includes Jewish, Hebrew, Hebrew religion. Yeah.
Abrahamic.
Similarly, he found a whiff of voidism in the Christian doctrine of creation ex nihilo, and everything came from nothing. That's what that means. And in a letter sent to Samvidananda Prabhu in London, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati confided that because the outlook of Westerners was based 100% on sense enjoyment, their belief in God was not solid, but tenuous and blurred. The Harmonist analyzed Christianity and Mundane, Harmonist is his magazine, and mundane empiricism as concordant, inasmuch as both, quote, justify the life of refined eating and drinking, and also deemed, quote, the Bible contains some indirect references to transcendence hopelessly mixed up with precepts of mundane ethical expediency. And finally, this is a quote, the questions that will require to be discussed in connection with the teaching of the Bible as it is current among the Christians of our day will be as follows, and we'll end with these 7 points. 1. Nebulous conception of the personality of Godhead. 2. Mundane and numerically limited conception of saviorship, guru. 3. Confusion between conditioned and free spiritual functions. 4. Overvaluation of hollow mundane morality. 5. Confusion between so-called moral and spiritual conduct. 6. Mundane organization of the Christian church. And 7. Superstitious rituals and doctrines opposed to philosophical and scientific experience. Interesting. Okay, I think we'll conclude there. Those who are here, please, we're going to have a Pushpanjali at 10 to 12. It's going to be a little sparse, so everyone who can come, please come. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura, Ki Jai.